This is 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 1 through 14. Now when the king was settled in his house, and the Lord had given him rest for all his enemies around him, the king said to the prophet Nathan, "See now, I am living in a house of cedar, but the ark of God stays in a tent." Nathan said to the king, "Go, do all that you have in mind, for the Lord is with you." But that same night, the word of the Lord came to Nathan. "Go and tell my servant David, thus says the Lord, are you the one to build me a house to live in? I have not lived in a house since the day that I brought up the people of Israel from Egypt to this day, but I have been moving about in a tent and a tabernacle. Wherever I have moved about among all the people of Israel, did I ever speak a word with any of the tribal leaders of Israel, whom I commanded to shepherd my people Israel, saying, why have you not built me a house of cedar? Now therefore, thus you shall say to my servant David, thus says the Lord of hosts, I took you from the pasture, from the following sheep, to be prince over my people of Israel. And I have been with you wherever you went, and have cut off all of your enemies from before you. And I will make you a great name, like the name of the great ones of the earth. And I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and will plant them, so that they may live in their own place, and be disturbed no more. And evildoers shall afflict them no more, as formerly, from the time that I appointed judges over my people Israel, and I will give you rest from all your enemies. Moreover, the Lord declares to you that the Lord will make you a house. When your days are fulfilled, and you lie down with your ancestors, I will rise up your offspring after you, who shall come forth from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be a father to him, and he shall be a son to me. When he commits iniquity, I will punish him with a rod, such as mortals use, with blows inflicted by human beings. So, first of all, my family left for Hawaii this morning. My wife and my two daughters left for Hawaii this morning. And without them, I don't know what I'm doing. So I forgot all of my notes that I've been taking over the last few days to talk to y'all this morning. So this might be really quick. Y'all might have a short church and get out of here and go eat fast. Secondly, so the first time I did this, and I used to have a gospel service that I ran as well, I would just pick my own scripture to go with whatever I wanted to say. But there's actual stuff that the pastors are supposed to follow, and it's throughout the year. It goes along with Lent and Pentecost and Advent and all that. So I decided this time I wouldn't cheat, and I'd actually try to come up with something off the actual scripture. And of course, it was David. And I'm not a big David fan. I don't understand why he's so important. I don't understand why he gets so many good things from God. Everybody knows like the David and Goliath story, right? Because that's fun, and you learn that in Sunday school. But David does horrible stuff. He sent one of his best guys and like his buddy off to the front lines of war to get killed so that he could take his wife and marry her. And then another time he goes to this field owned by this guy with his soldiers. And they sit around, I think it's for a couple of days. It might just be like an afternoon. And so he calls the landowner out, and he just straight up does some like Goodfellas, Sopranos, gangster stuff to him. He's like, hey, you see all these sheep you got over here? The guy's like, yeah. And David's like, me and my soldiers have been sitting around your sheep for a few days. We didn't steal any of them. Can you believe that? Can you believe how good we are in our hearts that we didn't steal any of your sheep? And you see those guys over there that you got watching the sheep? We didn't kill any of your guys. Out of the kindness of our hearts, we didn't kill any of your people, and we didn't steal any of your sheep. So don't you think we're owed a little something? Because next time we come back, we might not be as generous as we were this time. And I'm just like, that's so gangster. I can't believe and then God's like, no, that's my guy. That's my king. That's who he should be. So I never understood, not only that, the Messiah had to come from David's line. David's very important to everything going on. And I never understood what the appeal was of David. And there's lots of movies made about him and stuff like that. So last summer, during quarantine, I was looking on Facebook, and a friend of mine said, it was part of her bucket list to read the Bible from front to back. I said, I found this thing where you read the Bible in 90 days. I messaged her. And I was like, let's do that. Let's read the Bible in 90 days together, and we'll discuss it and stuff like that. And she was like, cool. And she finished it. I did not. I don't always stick to things like I should. She finished it. But we did do it for a little while, and we discussed stuff. And we got to the part about David. And she goes, hey, man. And I go, what? She goes, I am crushing on David so hard. And I go, what? What is this? And I go, what's the deal with David? And I was like, he's a bad guy. And she goes, yeah, but he does everything with such passion and flair. And I was like, oh my gosh, David's the bad boy. David's James Dean. David's Jim Morrison. He's Han Solo. If there's anybody young that watches My Hero Academia, he's Bakugo. David's the bad boy. The reason I don't understand David is because I've always been the rule follower. I've never been the bad boy. I was the guy in high school, and the girl's mom would be like, he's so sweet, and he does everything just like he's supposed to. He's just adorable. You should go date him. Do you know what that guarantees? That girl's not ever going to date me. As her mom said, that's exactly who you should date. Yeah, so that's why I never got or understood David. But I also don't get and understand this story because I'm like, David's trying to do something nice, right? David's trying to do something good for God. He's trying to do something that he thinks God wants and will please God. He's like, look, I'm living in this house of wood, which, first of all, I digress a lot. For those of you who haven't heard me speak before, I digress a lot. So do you ever read the Old Testament and think, oh, I'm so glad that I'm alive today? The king is living in a house of wood. I'm like, buddy, my house is made of wood and rocks. I have a refrigerator. I have a big screen TV with Netflix and HBO Max. Take that, bad boy. Take that, David. So the king's living in a house of wood, and he's like, I want to build something for the ark, because the ark's just out there in a tent, right? And so God comes and says, no. David, you're not understanding. I don't need you to do what you think is important. What you think is important right now is not. Haven't I always had y'all's back? Haven't I always taken care of everybody? Haven't I had your back? Haven't I promised you that everything's going to be okay? Just let me take care of this, and you don't worry about what you think you need right now so much. This is nothing new that I'm talking about right now. I've been writing these down in my notes on my phone. There's so many cliches and songs that have to do with what I'm talking about today. So the biggie, the first one is the Lord works in mysterious ways. Right? Everybody's heard that one. There's peace that passes all understanding. You're supposed to live with peace. You don't know what's happening, but that's okay. Your peace passes all of your understanding. Songs, one of my favorite songs, I sing it here all the time. Farther along, we'll know all about it. Farther along, we'll understand why. Everybody knows that one? Let go and let God. That was a cool one a few years ago. Everybody was supposed to let go and let God deal with it. Everything happens for a reason. My wife tells me that all the time. If I'm worrying, if I'm anxious, if I'm stressed, everything happens for a reason. Everything's going to work out. Everything's going to be okay. This is my favorite one right here. God only knows, and God makes his plans. The information's not available to the mortal man. Does anybody know what that is? That's Paul Simon. That's from Slip, Slide, and Away. That's poetry right there, everybody. That's poetry. There was the number one country song in 1990. Does anybody know what it was? Nobody at all. Garth Brooks, Unanswered Prayers. If anyone doesn't know what Garth Brooks' song Unanswered Prayers is about, it's about the guy, Garth Brooks, I reckon, and his wife, and they go to a high school football game. And they're in this high school football game, and they run into his old girlfriend, the girl that he was in love with in high school. And he thinks about how he used to pray that he would just have this girl, and that everything would be okay if he could just have this one girl. And now he's here with his wife, and he's like, oh, man, I'm so thankful for my unanswered prayers. I'm so thankful that God did not give me this girl, because I wouldn't be with the woman I'm with now, the woman I really love, the woman I was meant to be with. I have one of those stories. I guess when I was in 8th grade, we moved to the town that I ended up graduating high school from. It's a tiny town in South Texas. And I met a girl, and we dated for 2 years. It was a pretty intense relationship for junior high school. And we dated for 2 years. And then we broke up going into high school. But I did not get over it. And it's hard to get over someone if you have to go to school with them and see them every day because there's only like 30 people in your whole class. And you go to every class with them and see them. And so for, 4 years, everything was, all I thought about was having this girl, having her back. And I prayed about it all the time. And I talked, even if I had other dates or other girlfriends or whatever, it didn't matter. And I actually wrote a song about it. It's called Different Shades of Blue. And the song is about, because I remember when I think back, no matter what I accomplished, in football, or in track, or in theater, or academics, it didn't matter. Whatever award I was getting or anything, in the back of my head, it was like, well, this would be better if I was with her. Well, man, this isn't as fun as it could be if I was with her. Whatever I was doing, I really didn't enjoy high school because I was not with this girl. I was living my life in different shades of blue. None of the other colors really mattered to me, right? And this lasted up until probably a year after high school because she ended up moving in and being a roommate of mine for like a month or two after we came up to Austin together. But it did end up ending, and I still see her. We see her 4 or 5 times a year. She's a really good friend of mine. She's one of my favorite people to hang out and party with. We chat all the time, message and stuff. She's probably watching online because I told her I was going to talk about her. And every time we see her, every time my wife and I hang out with her, we get in the car and I'm just like, oh my God, I'm so happy that didn't work out. Not because she's bad or she's horrible, but because we're exactly alike. We are the exact same people, and we would have torn each other up and killed each other. There has to be one non-crazy person in a relationship for a relationship to work, and her and I are not the non-crazy people, so you can just guess what people we are. There has to be one person that does the work and keeps everything together, and there would have not been that person that her and I got together. So I'm just like, oh, I'm so glad things didn't work out with Molly. That's my unanswered prayer story. My first one, I've got another one. So when I was in 2nd grade, we were living in Rockport, Texas. We moved a lot. My dad was a coach. Moved a lot. So we were living in Rockport, Texas. And it was when I first started discovering music. And they first started having us write stuff in school. And they said, what do y'all want to be when you grow up? And I said, I'm going to be a country music singer or a writer. One or the other, author, writer. And then I started telling people when I got older because my parents were like, I don't know about this music thing. I was like, well, I'll be a lawyer. Yeah, but in the back of my head, I was like, I'm going to do music. I'm going to do music, right? That's all I'm going to do. That's all I want to do is music. So I didn't know if I was going to be able to sing. And then I got into theater and I learned how to use my voice. And I was like, well, you know what? I'm not a bad singer. I'm going to do music. But because my parents were so against it, I didn't really get to start until I was probably 20, 21 years old, which is late compared to a lot of people. And I got started doing it. And I spent a decade, well, that was all I did, my first decade with my wife, is I played music. And I worked at it pretty hard. And I wrote an album, and I had a band. We toured around and everything. But for various reasons, it didn't work out, and my first album bombed. I was 29. I was going to give myself till I was 30 to be a professional musician, like a big time. I was going to make it big, to be rich and famous, right? So I'm about to be 30. My first album bombs, and my wife is like, "Hey, I'm pregnant, by the way. And remember, like a long time ago, you said if we had a kid and one of us was making enough money, the other one should stay home. Well, I'm making the money." And I was like, "What?" And she was like, "Yeah, I think you should stay home with this kid." And I was like, I can't do that. Well, I'm supposed to be a rich and famous musician. But this album bombed, and half my band moved away, and now you're going to have a kid, and I don't know what to do. And I spent about a year and a half drunk. Just going to admit that to y'all. I spent about a year and a half drunk most of the time, the majority of the time. When my first daughter came, I wasn't very good at it for about 10 months. I mean, I kept her alive because that's what I was supposed to do. But I don't think my feeling was there. I don't think my heart was there. I didn't have that thing that a lot of people have when they first get their baby, and they're like, oh my gosh, my whole life has changed. And then when my oldest daughter was about 10 months old, her first word was daddy. And I just sat down. I broke down right there. I just started crying. It was just her and I in the living room. And I was like, I've ignored and mistreated this child for almost a year now, for the first year of her life. And her first word was daddy, was me. Her most important thing to her was me. I'm responsible for her. I'm responsible for her not only just staying alive, but growing up to be a somewhat decent person who can function in the world and function in society. And I started to take it more seriously. I started to understand what it meant to be a father and what it meant to be a stay-at-home father, a stay-at-home parent. It became very important to me. And we had my second daughter, and it became even more important to me. And it came to the point that when it was time for them to go off to school, and they did, it drove me crazy. And I would see other parents, and they'd be like, "Woo, can't wait till summer's over. Send those kids back to school. Can't wait till spring break's over. Oh, I can't believe we have to do spring break." And I'd be like, "I don't want to send mine back to school," because that's how much I loved being a father. And so I started homeschooling. So now I'm a homeschool father, and it's just the greatest thing in the world. First of all, because had I become rich and famous back when I wanted to, I'd be dead now. Let's just face it, I'd be dead. If I had all the money and time and power to go around and doing whatever I wanted, I wouldn't be here right now. But second of all, they've opened my eyes and my heart, and I've seen things that I hadn't seen before, and I've felt things that I haven't felt before. And my music's better, and I still get to do it. I don't do it hardcore anymore like I used to, but I play once or twice a week, and I'll never be rich and famous, but that's okay, because I found out, especially sitting during the pandemic, that all I want to do is spend as much time with them as I can while I'm still on this earth. That's what's most important to me. It's not people yelling for me. It's not making a lot of money. It's them. It's my little kids. It's my little girls. It's being around them as much as possible. They're going to Hawaii for a week, and I'm losing it already, y'all. I can't even tell you. Anyhow, so that's my second unanswered prayer story. Does anyone know who Alexander Fleming is? Raise your hand. Anybody know who Alexander Fleming is? There it is. Okay. Sir Alexander Fleming was a physician and a microbiologist from Scotland. He lived from 1880s to the 1950s. He was in World War I. He was a physician working, and he realized, so what they were doing was they had just germ theory had just come about. And they were using antiseptics. And they realized that if they cleaned these superficial wounds that were on top of the skin with antiseptics, people were getting better faster, and things were working better. But they decided, okay, well, that should work for deep wounds too. So they started cleaning out deep wounds with antiseptics. And Alexander Fleming was like, hey, these guys are dying really fast when you're pouring this antiseptic stuff in the deep wounds. Maybe there's something in there they need that we're killing off, and it's not working properly. So he rethought how to use antiseptics, and he realized that maybe all the things, all the germs, all the bacteria, all the bad things aren't as bad as we thought they were. So that was his first contribution to science. And then a few years later, Alexander he's doing research in his laboratory, and he was notorious for being really dirty in his laboratory. And the other people, like his research assistants and people like that, would try to clean up and stuff. And he'd be like, "Oh, you are so silly. Why are you always cleaning your stuff up? This isn't so important." And they're like, "Dude, no, it is. We're supposed to have a clean workspace here, and we're dealing with bacteria and growing bacteria and stuff." And he was like, "Oh, you are so silly." And so all of a sudden, in his slides, petri dishes. I am not a scientist. I did not know what he was exactly working on. There was some bacteria that started growing in there, right? And what he does next, I don't understand why he does this. None of the research I was doing told me why. But he, let's see, how do I put this nicely? He blew his nose into the petri dish on top of this bacteria that was in this plate. And then he starts looking at it, and he realizes that where he blew his nose, this stuff is dying. This bacteria is dying. So then he starts taking all kinds of stuff. I won't go into everything that he put in the bacteria, but he puts all kinds of stuff from his body into the bacteria and his research assistants' bodies and whatever he can find. And he's seeing what kills stuff the most. He found out that egg whites kill this bacteria the most. He basically discovered this thing in our body called lysozyme that kills bacteria. It's in our mucus, it's in our saliva, it's in our tears, so that when things that aren't supposed to be there try to come in, this enzyme kills it. And he discovered that. And the third thing he did, once again, we said Alexander's not real, he's not real clean in his work, right? So he goes on vacation and he leaves, they're studying staph, like I guess what causes staph infections and different stuff like that. So they're studying this bacteria, staph. And he leaves all this stuff just laying out on benches and goes on holiday with his family, vacation to us Americans. He goes on vacation with his family. I don't know how long they're gone, a week, 2 weeks. And he comes back and he looks, and all his petri dishes, or a lot of them, have, from the air, grown this bacteria in them. And he says, famously, this was his words, "That's funny," because he looked at the bacteria and he looked what was going on, and it was killing this staph infection. So he pulled some of the bacteria off, and he looked at it, and he figured out what it was, and it was something called penicillium. And he realized, man, this bacteria is killing the bad stuff. It's killing the infections. So he found out how to make it into medicine that we call penicillin. It became stuff we call antibiotics. Now, this all happened because Alexander Fleming made mistakes. Because Sir Alexander Fleming, he was dirty. And I can tell you that I'm listening to a podcast called History That Doesn't Suck. And they've talked about each president and growing up. I can tell you that each president, like for the first 100 years, I didn't do the exact numbers, but probably 85% of them had lost one parent. Probably 75% of them had lost one child, one sibling. This is how important what Alexander Fleming did. Like, I would say 50% of the people in here wouldn't be here right now if we hadn't found out what penicillin was. 75% of my family wouldn't be here. My wife had a strep throat. All growing up, they had to cure it with antibiotics. My oldest daughter, strep throat. My youngest daughter, she also had infections. These things don't heal themselves often. That's why the life expectancy grew exponentially since Sir Alexander Fleming found out, since he made that mistake, and found out that this bacteria in the air could kill these infections. Things don't always work out the way we had planned. Things don't always happen the way we think they're supposed to happen. Has anyone in here, let's raise our hands again, ever heard of the Beastie Boys? A band called the Beastie Boys? 3, 4, 5. A lot more people than heard of Alexander Fleming who invented penicillin, right? So the Beastie Boys were a band. Hip-hop band, eventually, mostly. Hip-hop band, rap band. They came together in the 1970s. 3 guys, mostly. There were some other people that came in and out, but it's mostly 3 guys, the Beastie Boys. And they first did punk music. And they were basically just these 3 Jewish kids who dropped out of school and ran the streets of New York. Right? And they liked to drink a lot, but they also liked to do art and music. They were really into all that stuff. So they were doing punk music first, and then they started listening to stuff like Run DMC, and they discovered hip-hop, and they discovered rap. And it became what they wanted to do. And so they started doing that stuff, and they had some local hits there in New York that did all right. And then they decided one day, they were always fighting with, because they were poor dropout kids, and they were always fighting with the kind of richer suburb kids and college kids who they didn't feel like these guys were really doing things the right way. They were trying to drink too much and party, and they weren't about art or living or growing or anything like that. So they decided to make a satire song about these party kids that they don't like, these rich party kids. And they call it, "You've Got to Fight for Your Right to Party." Yes, Sarah's heard it before. So you've got to fight for your right to party. And they're like, this is hilarious. This is going to put these people in their place. These bros who just want to party and drink all the time. It's going to knock them on their backsides. And they're going to understand where we're coming from, and they're just going to hate this. Well, guess who loved "You've Got to Fight for Your Right to Party"? The exact people who they were making fun of, the exact people they were trying to satirize, started buying it in bulk. And it became the first #1 rap song of all time that went to the #1 of the charts. They had the first album, License to Ill, that was rap, that went to #1 on the charts. They started touring with Madonna. So I was the oldest child, but I had a friend who had older brothers, and they had the Beastie Boys, and it was the first stuff I ever listened to besides country. I'd heard rock, I'd heard Van Halen, and I'd heard Michael Jackson. I liked little Michael Jackson, but I really hadn't liked anything before except for country music. And I just fell in love when I heard the Beastie Boys. I was like, what is this? This is something different. This is something new. Why country and rap are my two favorites? I've thought about this a lot because people ask me all the time. I think it's because they both tell stories, like simple stories, that are about people's lives. And that makes a lot of sense to me. So I started listening to the Beastie Boys. I got my friend to record their tape onto another tape. I took it home and I hid it from my parents. And I was like 8 or 9 years old. Like, Beastie Boys, you got to fight for your right to party. Right? Beastie Boys become world famous. And so the progression for me goes, I'm listening to the Beastie Boys, and then I'm listening to LL Cool J, and then I'm listening to Public Enemy and Run DMC, and then I'm listening to NWA and Eazy-E, on up to Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg, and then Tupac, and then Eminem. And I was listening to a podcast a few years ago, and I stopped listening to it because I didn't really like it. But the one thing this guy said that made sense, he was talking about why white kids in the suburbs fell so in love with hip-hop and the hip-hop culture in the late 80s and early 90s. And he said he compared it to Westerns of the generations before us. And he said this was a real thing. This was a real danger. This was things people really were experiencing and having. And we could live vicariously through that, through the violence and through the anger. And we could live vicariously through that. But it was just far enough away that we didn't actually have to deal with it ourselves. Because me and my friends would be like, we might start a gang one day or something like that. None of that ever happened, right? But what it did for me was it also awakened in me, like at first I was just like, well, this is fun, this is cool. And then I was like, wait, why is this happening? Why is this happening in those neighborhoods? Why is that stuff happening there? And it's not happening to me. So it made me more socially aware, and it woke me up in that way and in that fashion. I don't know if it did that for the world, but I do know that what it did is it completely changed music in the world, because hip-hop is the main genre now. You know, it sells bigger than anything else, whereas it hadn't before. It was kind of, especially when I started first listening to it, it was just a little niche thing, right? And, you know, it was the next step, evolution from blues to jazz to country to rock, and then on to hip-hop, right, that America's put out there for people, that has become important to people in the world. All because the Beastie Boys made a satire song that people took seriously in 1987. See how that works? All because Alexander Fleming made a mistake and let some stuff get dirty in his lab. We have penicillin. All because the Beastie Boys wrote a song that was supposed to be making fun of people who took it seriously. We have hip-hop as our biggest and #1 music in the world, really, right now. This is the way God works. This is the way God works all the time when I see it. This is the way, I told y'all this is the way God worked in my life. Lockdown, I got better at music because I got to sit around and practice. At first, I was a nervous wreck and I was scared. But, I used that time. Sometimes what we think we need right now, sometimes what we think we want right now is not the most important thing, because God knows what's better. God knows what we ultimately need. So am I saying not to work? Am I saying not to try for things? Am I saying not to put any effort into anything and just sit back and be like, oh, let go and let God, he's going to take care of me? No. I'm saying not to worry so much. And that's something I need every day, is not to worry so much, right? Don't worry if you don't get that promotion. Don't worry if that person that you're pining for doesn't want you. Don't worry if that big project you wanted to do at church, not everybody gets behind the way you were hoping for. Just try and relax a little bit, because God's got this. He doesn't need you to build the house for the ark. He's going to take care of you. He knows in the end what you need. Dear God, thank you for these blessings. Thank you for what we're about to receive. Please help us to use them to the best of our abilities for your work. Amen.